Welcome to Sectional Forms. Mistakes were made edition. Alright, so mistake number one. I should have just made my second piece that I did like at the same time that I was going to attach it, but I didn't because that's not how the demo went. So both of my pieces have been thrown. They were thrown the day before. I let them set up overnight. And really, the top piece shouldn't have been set up beforehand because I was going to rethrow it anyways. So I don't know why I did it. The other thing about the form that I've chosen to do is that it's this like spring form. And so that spring form just automatically is going to like want to move back and forth. And I don't know that that's really a mistake. It's just the fact that I'm making it a lot harder on the top and I have a spring form on the bottom equals just not the best combo. It's still going to work out and everything's going to be fine. But, mistakes were made. So what you've noticed me doing so far is that I've gone through and I've scored both sides. I scored both sides that I'm going to be attaching. And both of them are angled differently. So this one is angled going up, I guess like volcano version. And the other one was more like sinkhole going down, so angled inward. So that way that they can be kind of reverse of one another. And then when I can put them together, they'll just magically go together like that. Now, things that I didn't do wrong. I did actually make my base and my connection point thick enough. The connection point that I'm putting it on is like probably twice as thick as the rest of my walls. My walls aren't super thick. Probably about maybe a little bit less than like a quarter of an inch, but more than an eighth of an inch. So what is that, like 3/5 or something? Yeah, whatever. But then my actual connection point is more around the lines of like a ½ inch. So right now my goal is to take both ribs. I like to use a stiff rib on the outside and on the inside and really compress those two together. Now I'm not trying to make that area thinner. You have to be careful. I don't want to overwork that area. I want to make sure that they get stiff enough and together enough that they are well joined, but I don't want that to be a thin spot on my pot. I also don't want that to be a super wet spot on my pot. Now here's where some of my problems are coming in, because the top part of my piece is fairly dry, so it creates a lot of friction on the piece that's just below it. Because while it is fairly firm, it's not quite, it has, again, we're going to be putting a lot of stress on this one little curve there that's on that first divot in. And that part just isn't going to be happy. And you can see that it's already starting to not be happy by wobbling around a little bit more. So my life would be just so much easier if I had just. But, I didn't. So here's what we're going to do. First thing first is I'll go back. Ribs are always a really helpful thing because they're making it so that they are allowing things to set up. They're pulling away some water. They're compressing the clay. But also because I want these angles in here. Might as well get those angles kind of close now. But you can see as I'm pushing it, it really does force that little angle to bend more. And I'm going to take off this big chunk up on the top just because that is by far the driest bit of my clay right now. So I'll take that off and make my life a little bit easier. The next thing that I'm going to do is figure out how to get more water on there while I'm working on all of this. So if I just kind of like lift this up and then I'll take some water and put that, I'll try to throw it a little bit more, but I'm also going to put some water right along the rim there. So that way it has a chance to kind of seep down into the piece. But you can see it's already not like super happy with me. So I'm just going to add water on that rim and let it sit for a little bit while I work on the rest of this. So I do want to try to make sure that I keep that shape as clean as possible, but it is kind of moving around. And the clay is softening a little bit now that I've been working with it a bit, but I'm also trying to pull up a little bit more so I'm not applying so much pressure, downward pressure again on the seams. And we'll get just a little bit more water up there. And I want to clean off water where I don't want it to be is definitely on the lower seams of the pot. So the idea when you're working with a sectional form is that it would be a lot harder to do this if our bottom piece, it would be like pretty impossible, at least for me to do. If my bottom piece was still wet, this would totally sit down on itself. So by having to make a form like this, it makes a lot of sense to do it with sectional pieces. And then with each piece, each section that you add, you throw that kind of right before you actually go to attach it. Maybe let it set up just enough so that it's easy to flip it over. But otherwise, no, you want the bottom part to be set up enough to handle the new weight. And you want the top part to be wet enough that you can still throw it relatively easily. I do want to be careful as I go through this whole process not to get the bottom too wet again, because that will just make everything worse. But the smartest thing I could have done, again, with my mistakes being made, is just have thrown this piece a little bit later, or even just rethrow a new piece for the top. I don't know why I didn't. I just, sometimes we just get attached to our lost costs or something like that. What is that economic term? Whatever. That's definitely what I'm doing. So that little crack right there, that part of that is happening again because it's just getting flexed too much when it's going back and forth, because it's that spring form. But we can cheat. Like I said, there's no wrong way to do something unless it's not doing what you want, which honestly, I don't want to be doing this, so I guess that is wrong. But, we'll just do what we gotta do. So I wouldn't say that it put me too far out of whack on this entire process, but it didn't help. I would say that the other thing that you need to remember, especially as a beginner doing this, is just be kind to yourself. Also, when you stop spinning it, it looks fine. It's only when you spin it doesn't look wobbly. So just don't put it in the middle of a lazy Susan on your dining table or something. And if your friends comment on them, tell them to go make it. We're learning. So I'm going to let the top set up a little bit. And this is the other thing that you should kind of keep a note to yourself about is when you are working on these pieces. If you're working on it and it's getting worse instead of better, it's probably a good idea to let it set up a little bit, unless of course your problem is that it's too dry. But I'm going to take this opportunity to actually trim these pieces on the lower bit so that I can have the really clean line that we were hoping for. Because you can get, anytime you want a nice clean line, the way to go is to do that with in your leather hard stage. Now, the plus side of me making this piece a little bit while it was on the stiffer side is that I can go in and trim it now because it is still fairly stiff, and also why my piece is a little bit more on the wobbly side. And the higher up I go, the more it wants to put stress on my connection points that are lower down. I'm not going to flip this over to trim it. I'm just going to trim this right side up. And I'll show you what that means in a second. Mostly just because I'm not so attached to this form that I really want to spend the time to do that, but also because it is a little bit wobbly. It just makes my life harder. So trimming right side up, I know that what I left before to trim off of my piece. So I'm going to trim that, like the first chunk of it off using the needle tool and dragging that down to the base of the wheel head. And then I cut underneath that little piece too, and I can just peel that bit off. And this is what I do for a lot of my really tall forms, forms that it would be dangerous and or difficult to trim a foot ring on. I just don't. It's great. Generally, if it's like that, it might not be something that people are going to flip over on a daily basis anyways. So now I can trim that bottom to match. I can also go in and fix all of the other little like bits that I want to clean up and organize and get the sharp line that I was hoping for on our corners. So I'm just checking the stiffness of the clay at this point. Also, I want to feel around on the seam, make sure that that's not too like wonky on the inside. This was the one that I added that little coil to because it was starting to flex and change shape. Let's see if I can clean that up a little bit so it doesn't seem so obvious. So I am using my wooden knife to do a little bit of trimming, again, because this top bit is softer than the bottom. But the only reason it's softer is because I've been adding water to it to try to get it to go back into shape. Again, my recommendation is throw the second piece like right around when you're going to use it instead of letting it set up with your bottom piece. I'm going to use a heat gun a little bit on here, right at my connection point, because I do need to apply a little bit more pressure up at the top. So I'm adding water up at the top while heating up every other little element so that it doesn't go all wonky on me. So my entire goal now is to just get that top bit angled in just enough so that it kind of matches with the other pieces. Honestly, I kind of like the hula dance that it's been doing. It's not too bad. So I have my fingers on the inside supporting, and that's still happening pretty much everywhere, like at least where I can. as much as I can. I'll go back over again and smooth this over using the back side of my wooden knife to just get rid of any scratches or dents or whatever. Smooth out that surface. All right, I'll just take off the last little bit on my base so I have a little bit of an undercut, and it's over.